Welcome to Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry. In every episode, we explore how people from educators and artists to executives and entrepreneurs lead with authenticity, rise through adversity, and share the wisdom they've gained along the way. Today's guest is someone who has spent decades bringing imagination to life for some of the world's most recognized children's brands, Barbie, Disney Princess, and Hello Kitty. Ellie Shapiro is a creative strategist, brand builder, toy inventor, and storyteller whose life took unexpected turns, including a solo year-and-a-half journey around the world, taking on a multi-billion-dollar toy company in a lawsuit and winning, marrying at 51 and becoming a mother at 57. Her story is about courage, about reinvention, about transforming loss into creation, and about trusting yourself, even when the timeline looks nothing like you imagined. Ellie, welcome to Expressions of Leadership. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Hi, so nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Now, Ellie, how did you first find your way into the toy industry? What drew you to it?
Well, I had just finished university. I'd graduated with a Bachelor of Commerce, and I was trying to decide, what do I want to do? And one day I'm sitting and I see an ad in the newspaper. I was living in Toronto at the time, so this was the Toronto Star, and I see this ad from Mattel, and it says entry-level position in marketing, assistant product manager. And I thought, forget it. Like hundreds of people are going to apply, forget it. And so I did nothing. And then the following week, the same ad was in the paper, and something came over me, and I thought, like, I'm getting that job. And so these were the days, like you couldn't email anything. You had to mail your resume in. But I thought, I'm not mailing this resume. I'm taking it and I'm going to sit in the lobby at Mattel and try and figure it out. Naive 20 something. I think I was probably 23 at the time. And so I go to Kinko's, I copy my resume. I didn't have a car at the time. They were about an hour away from where I lived. Took the subway, took the bus. I remember it was raining that day, and I, trudged into reception at Mattel, and I tell the lady at the reception I'm here to drop off my resume and for that assistant product manager position. And she says, okay, drop it off. That everybody's at lunch, and thanks. And I said, I'd really like to meet with the HR person. Do you mind if I sit and just wait until she gets back? And I remember the receptionist sort of thought, okay, fine. And so I sat there for a good, I think an hour and a half, 2 hours until the HR person came down the stairs, and I introduced myself, and she said, are you qualified? I said, yes. And I gave her my resume, and that was it. And she said, thank you. And a couple days later, I hadn't heard anything yet, and I was super eager. So I called and I spoke to the HR woman, and I remember her hesitating. And she said, okay, come in for an interview. And so I did. And it was pretty amazing because I met with the product manager who was doing the hiring. And she looked at me and she said, had you just submitted your resume or sent it in, I would never have agreed to meet you because your cover letter seemed like such BS. Like it was, so over the top effusive about Barbie and, everything. And she said, meeting you, I realize, you're the real deal. And she offered me the job, and it was the assistant product manager on Barbie. So, I like to tell that story to young people, who are just starting out in their careers because, I think you're sort of able to get away with some bold moves. And then I think coupled with, for me at least, my naivete, it worked. And that's how I got my first job at Mattel.
And you worked at Mattel in Toronto for a while.
Yes, for 3.5 years.
3.5 years. So then how did you ultimately make your way to Los Angeles?
So, Mattel's head office is in LA, and when I joined in Toronto, I remember thinking, wow, like this could be my opportunity to one day live in LA, which had become a dream of mine since I had visited in right after graduating from school, from university. My mom took me as a graduation present. She took me on a mother and daughter tour to California, and I looked at her when we were in LA, and I said, I'm going to live here one day. So when I started at Mattel in Toronto, and I knew, their head office was LA, I thought, wow, like if the opportunity ever comes up, I'm going to go. And so living in Toronto, we would visit Los Angeles and head office all the time, like, a few times a year. And one year I was out there and a woman came up to me and she said, there's a position in international marketing. Are you interested? And I, pretty much right away said, yeah, hire me, sign me up. And she sort of laughed and she said, well, why don't you go back to Toronto and think about it for a little bit? And, then I called her shortly after that. And, the rest is history. I moved, maybe 2 months later.
And how long were you in Los Angeles at Mattel?
Um, exactly to the day, 3.5 years. So it was 3.5 in Toronto, 3.5 in at Mattel in Los Angeles.
And then you joined Disney's interactive group when
Yes.
digital gaming was just beginning. What was it like to be at the forefront of that shift?
Well, it was amazing actually. And at the time, this was the mid 90s, and this was just when employees were starting to get their own computers at their desk. It was like the Stone Age. You were still having secretaries typing up your memos and notes and things. It was sort of crazy. And I thought, like, I wanted to learn more about computers in that world. So I jumped at the chance to work for Disney, and Disney also had always been a dream of mine. I grew up with the wonderful world of Disney, and it was all magical to me. And so I really wanted to experience, the interactive, learn about computers, and get my feet into that next world of play. That was what was going to become a new type of play for kids, and I really wanted to understand what that was all about. So I was like, yeah, I'm in.
And there was a moment while you were working there when you had a game launch and it didn't align with the actual movie release. And then everything had to be pulled back as a result.
Yeah.
What did that disappointment teach you about leadership and expectations?
I think the biggest thing, it was very interesting because, as you said, like the game was supposed to launch with the movie release. And the folks at Disney, my group, and really from president down, we looked at the game and we said, it's not good enough. And they said, well, we're not releasing a product that's not good enough, and we're going to hold it back. And what happened was we found another key date in the release, which was home video. And so we said, okay, we'll release the game when it's, I wouldn't say perfect, but when it is great and we feel good about it and it is up to Disney standards, that's when we're going to release the game. And, I really saw, it was very eye-opening to me because I realized like Disney had the highest standards. And, that was what it was about. If the product does not meet that high standards, it doesn't matter the timeline, the expectations, whatever else. And I thought like, good on them. And it was really amazing to watch and see because we risked a fair number of unit sales by releasing later than the movie. But that's Disney, and I think it's true with all the divisions at Disney that if the product, whatever they're working on, isn't up to standards, it's not going to be released.
But of course, you were pretty disappointed. You had been working hard on this. And so it was disappointing to see it not come to fruition at that time. And you said you had a conversation with your boss. And the boss said to you that you were just too passionate. I'm
Yeah.
curious, like, how did that land with you?
Yeah, it was awful. Like, I remember thinking, don't listen, don't take this to heart. Like, I mean, she was right. I was super passionate about what I was doing. So it was super disappointing when I had to get out of all the programs and the promotions that I had just put together based on the game releasing, with the movie. So I really had to back out of all the stuff that I had done. And it was really, really hard for me. And that's really what my boss was responding to. I think, I guess my come down. But telling an employee you're too passionate, I don't think was the right thing to say. I would have thought and I would have hoped she would say, we value that passion, but, maybe given me some tools or some other input, how to deal with what I was going through. To say you're too passionate, I felt like it was demoralizing me or it was demoralizing. Like it was devaluing me. So it
Hmm.
was tough. It was tough.
And taking the wind out of your sails because you were excited about the work that you
Yes.
were doing.
Yes. Yes. And that was, I cared deeply. So for her to come back and say that, was really difficult for me. And I remember like everything she said afterwards, I pretty much discounted because I thought this one, this person doesn't really get it. So, or at least she didn't get me, On some level, I guess she got it because she was, the head of the head of our group. But I really thought a lot about it, and I wished that, today I think about it again. You bring it up. I really wished that she had taken that passion and channeled it into something for the betterment of the group or the project. If I was in that position and one of my employees was so passionate and feeling down about what they had just done, what was going on with whatever they were working on, I think I would have said, okay, I love your passion. Let's put that here. Let's find another project for you and channeled it into into good. So it was really a missed opportunity, I thought, on her part and for the company.
Hmm. Absolutely. Lost opportunity when it comes to leading your people in a way that's going to keep them engaged, keep them excited, even when you
Exactly.
have those moments of disappointment.
Exactly.
And then at one point, you were laid off,
Yeah.
which initially was a shock, I'm sure,
Yeah.
but it ultimately revealed something important about where you were and where you wanted to be.
Yes.
What did that experience clarify for you?
Well, it was first of all, it wasn't an isolated thing. It wasn't only me. Hundreds of people were getting laid off at the same time. So I knew it wasn't tied to my performance. That was a big thing for me because I still felt good about myself and what I was doing and what I had done. But the real pro of getting laid off for me was that it allowed me to not have another job lined up. If I didn't get laid off, and I wanted to leave Disney, I really could not have left until I had another job lined up. That was just how am raised. Like, it just was a given. You don't leave something without having, that next thing that you're going to. So getting laid off allowed me to really sit back. They gave me a little bit of money. I had some money saved up in the bank, and I thought, what do I really want to do next? At that time, I'd been in the corporate world for a little over 10 years, and I thought, who am I and what do I want next? And I also had a lot of creative projects in my head that I thought, I really wanted time to pursue. And I thought, what better time than now? So and it was easier. Like I hate to say, but I was so attached to my parents and what they thought, when they and what they were saying was right. And it also allowed me to say, hey, mom, hey, dad, this is what I'm going to do next. And so it was sort of, in a sense, freedom for me.
Well, Ellie, I want to pause there because what I'm hearing is something that so many people experience, that moment when what looks like a setback may actually
Yeah.
be an opening.
Yes, for sure.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll explore what happened when Ellie chose not to go back to the corporate life and how that leap led her toward becoming an inventor. Stay with us. Leadership isn't just about strategy, it's about people. The Forward Project helps organizations cultivate strong, adaptable leaders who create thriving workplace cultures. If you're ready to invest in your leadership team, visit www.theforwardproject.co to learn how. Welcome back to Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry, and today I'm speaking with Ellie Shapiro, creative strategist, toy inventor, and someone who has redefined leadership through reinvention and resilience. Now, Ellie, after the layoff, you decided not to return to corporate life, and that's a powerful leadership decision. What gave you that confidence?
I think that I always felt that if I could sustain myself financially and I was happy doing whatever I was doing, that I didn't need to go back to corporate. So I do want to say, like, during that time, I did take some short-term freelance or consulting gigs within the corporate world, but those felt good to me. Like, they had finite dates and they were well paying. And so I was, able to continue doing some other projects at the same time that I really wanted to put some focus on.
And how did that season of freelancing develop you as a leader?
Well, I think first of all, I I had to develop self-trust, because I was on my own. I had no title anymore. I had nobody behind me to, you know, identify, help identify who I was. It was just me, Ellie Shapiro. I was not calling up and saying Ellie Shapiro from Disney, which had some cachet, I guess, to it. So I really had to have self-trust and believe in what I was doing and who I was. So I think that was probably the biggest thing.
And then when did you begin to see yourself not just as someone marketing toys, but as someone inventing them?
Well, so I always had a ton of ideas floating around in my head. And this time I sort of couldn't let it go. I had this idea for these dolls that lived in the clouds, Cloud9 girls. And I I thought this is actually a really good line. And so I found this person to help me make the prototypes, and I took them to New York Toy Fair where all the buyers come in, and I presented them and I had really, really good feedback. And after Toy Fair, I thought, wow, like this actually could be something. Maybe I should show Mattel and see if there's any interest. And they pretty much said yes on the spot. They said, we're going to test it with a small focus group and we'll get back to you. And they did. And they said, you hit us at just the right time. We had a slot in the small doll category, and the dolls tested amazing with the girls. And so, they put them in the line. And then I was like, wow, I guess I'm an inventor now. So, I think my life sort of had this path where, I was just going about doing what I was doing, and that sort of just fell in my lap.
And what did it mean to you when Mattel licensed it immediately like that?
Well, it was a big deal. I thought, wow, like I guess I'm okay at this or pretty good. And, I remember going to Toy Fair. It was probably the following year. And I was telling some other inventor in the waiting room, that out of the gate I had licensed this doll line. We were both sitting waiting to pitch our new products. And I was telling this guy that, I had just licensed this line. It was the first thing that I had created. And he sort of looked at me, with a puzzled look, and he shook his head, and he said, it took me 20 years to license my first toy. And I remember thinking like, wow, that was a big deal, what I had done.
And then how did stepping into that identity of inventor shift how you showed up in negotiations and in creativity and also in risk taking?
I had to, I was now seeing myself as a creator, and I had to embrace that part of myself. And it was very different than being a marketing executive and working for someone else and marketing someone else's products. So, I really had to believe in myself and my creations and what I was doing. I had to be willing to live in this unstable environment, you know, um, and the uncertainty of it. I was now creating and working, not knowing whether or not anything I was doing was ever going to go anywhere.
And looking back, what leadership muscles were you building during that time that you didn't yet realize?
Probably the biggest one, resilience, because I heard a lot of no's, and to be able to understand that that no is not a rejection of me as a person, to be able to just separate the no from from me versus, they're just telling you that their product that you're they're just telling you that whatever you're pitching, your concept might not be right for them, but they're not, saying no to me as a person. So I really had to sort of hear what people were telling me and interpret what the feedback was in order to maybe go back and improve whatever I was doing or modify or whatever. So there was a lot of also communication and reading the room. I met some people in coffee shops, which was, and I would meet a single inventor relations person, or I'd meet in an office where there were four people who I was presenting to. So I really had to understand and communicate clearly and know how to pitch whatever I was doing so that people got it and understood how it fit within whatever they were doing or their goals were. Because it wasn't only about having a great idea, but it was understanding the company's goals and objectives and what they were bringing to the table and to kids as well. Like that was a big part of it.
There's something really profound about that shift that you're talking about from promoting other people's visions and ideas
Yeah.
to standing behind your own. We're going to take a pause here. And when we come back, we'll explore the moment that shifted everything for Ellie. You won't want to miss this. True transformation starts from within. The Forward Project partners with organizations to create meaningful culture shifts and develop leaders who inspire real change. If your team is ready to move forward with purpose, visit www.theforwardproject.co. Welcome back to Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, and today we're in conversation with Ellie Shapiro, whose leadership journey includes not just the corporate experience and inventing toys, but deep personal transformation. Ellie, around this same season, you lost both of your parents within about a year. And soon after, you met with a spiritual advisor, and based on their guidance, you decided to travel solo. Now, you thought the trip would last maybe a couple of weeks, and then it became a year and a half. What happened?
Yeah. I was having a very good time and, did not want to go home. But, yeah, I mean, that's the surface answer. But, you know, yes, I told my friends and my family when I was leaving, I was going to be away for 2 weeks, maybe 2 months. Um, but that trip was transformative in so many ways. I realized very quickly it was about really figuring out who I was and and what was important to me. And so I said, I'm going to travel as long as I can continue to afford to be on the road. And I was living on very little money, so that wasn't such a hard thing, $10 a day. Um, but and when I'm not happy, if I'm not happy, or if I just feel like I sort of have connected to what I needed to connect to within myself, then then I would go home.
Now, you also said that the trip was about meeting yourself.
Yes.
What exactly does that mean?
Well, I think what I discovered was that I I was after my parents passed away. I guess I should back up a little bit. After my parents passed away, I started to question, where am I in my life? It was really the first time that I looked within myself and I said, like, what's going on here? Because at the time I felt like I'd made all the right decisions for myself. And but I was in a place in my life that really didn't feel right for me. And and I mean, I was still single. I didn't have any kids yet. I wasn't at the time, after my parents passed, I was not in a relationship. I had recently broken up with someone who was ready to get married, but it didn't feel right for me for a variety of reasons. And at the time I was living and sharing a house with my girlfriend or living in my friend's house. And I thought, like, what is going on for me? And so then I met this spiritual advisor and she said, I really think you should go somewhere where nobody knows you, where you can just sort of, learn how to just be. And I think what I realized was that I was living in a box that I had created and people saw me in a certain way, in a certain role. And if I was ever going to want to change and figure out really who I was and what I valued in the world, then I needed to step out and be in a new place where I didn't have any expectations or understanding of who I was. And I was just going to be able to rely on, just me as a human being, connecting with other people and learning what I was all about and what made sense to me and what I wanted for the rest of my life. So, and that's what happened. And I think, in my case, it took that year and a half of travel to really connect with who I was or who I am and what's important to me and for me for how I live my life. And it was no accident. Right after I got back from my trip, I'd been back only 2 weeks in LA and I met the guy who I would ultimately marry a few years later. And so, I think that trip changed me in you know, an unbelievable number of ways. And I think it almost like it took the walls down from around my heart and allowed me to connect on a deeper level, which was really always what I wanted from a relationship. So it was really an amazing experience for me, and it changed the course of my life.
And how did that experience of traveling and living in six different countries over that time period reshape your understanding of your own leadership?
Yeah, I was living on $10 a day. I had nothing, my hair was a disaster. I had the ugliest clothes. I was, at the time I was 46 or 45, and I was backpacking, meeting these like late 20s, early 30s, because that's primarily who was traveling alongside me. So, it was interesting for me because I was alone, and the only thing that I could rely on was my personality and my maybe empathy for others and my adaptability to my situation and my surroundings, my communication skills, you know, um, and really, I guess backing up, the adaptability was a huge one because I think it was adapting to this like oftentimes gross environment, and doing things in order to not feel gross about, like I had a sarong or like this giant scarf that doubled as a bed cover because I didn't want to sleep on the, suspect sheets. Like again, I was living on $10 a day. So, I mean, all the places were clean, I guess, relatively, but still, so I found ways to make myself comfortable while I was on the road. But, the other big one was adapting when you didn't know the language. Like I would throw myself into these crazy situations. I remember going to Korea and landing at the airport, and I purposely arrived not having one thing planned because I wanted to challenge myself, which was so crazy when I think about that now. But, it's learning to get by when you don't understand the language and, figuring out some key communication skills, which for me were, if I landed someplace, I needed to know how to say hello and thank you and smile. A smile, really took me far throughout my whole journey. So there were a lot of things that I was learning, about myself and really, I guess, being like a leader in my own world.
And then you got home, and as you said, about a couple of weeks after you returned, you found your soon to be husband. And then you married at 51. What did that teach you about trust and timing?
Well, it taught me that for me, to never give up. I always believed that I would one day find my guy. I think at that point in my life, in my later 40s, did I care if I got married or not? My parents had already passed away. It wasn't really as important as maybe it was when I was younger, but certainly I wanted to find the guy for me, my person. And I truly never lost that trust. And sure, it happened for me quite a bit later, but I realized like the timing doesn't matter. We're on our own schedules. I remember early on, my mother, I had broken up with a guy or when I was in my mid 20s. I wasn't ready to get married. And my mother said to me, there's no agenda in life. And I really feel strongly like she's right. I think you make your own schedule. So I was a little later than other people, but so be it. I never lost hope, and I trusted that he was out there, and he was. Thank goodness.
There's a real through line here about that trust and timing, and yet also choosing boldly. Let's take a brief pause, and when we return, we'll talk about a pivotal moment in Ellie's toy inventing career when her concept was stolen and what it took to stand her ground. Don't go anywhere. Are you looking to connect with an audience passionate about leadership, growth, and success? Become a sponsor of Expressions of Leadership and align your brand with inspiring conversations that make an impact. Contact us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com to explore sponsorship opportunities. Welcome back to Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, and today's conversation with Ellie Shapiro is about creative courage and the kind of leadership that emerges when your integrity is tested. So, Ellie, you're back from your trip. You met the man of your dreams, and you're inventing toys again. And then came a pivotal moment when you pitched a new toy concept called Wishables. It was ultimately rejected, and about a year later, you saw something strikingly similar appear in a major toy line. Take us back to that moment. What did you think and what did you feel?
So first I was shocked because I thought, how can this be? Like I I mean, I just couldn't believe that I was seeing essentially my concept at retail. And, I had no clue it was going to be out there. And then I immediately went to, well, maybe it was an oversight, and I thought maybe it was an accident. They forgot there's new people there. Who knows? And so I picked up the phone and I called the company's inventor relations person, who I knew he had just joined from another company. And so I knew the person, and I also knew he hadn't been there when I had initially pitched the idea. And I do want to say, or the concept, I mean, there were prototypes, presentation, everything. I do want to mention that, the product that I had shown them about a year and a half earlier had not been initially rejected. It had been taken into their company and reviewed for months and months until finally they came back and they said pass. And, they had prototypes, they had presentation, they had everything. And so when I picked up the phone to call this inventor person, I said, I know you weren't there. Maybe, I need to shed some light. Look, you guys had this for months. I know it was reviewed. What happened? And so he said, let me look into it and I'll get back to you.
And ultimately, did he get back to you?
Yeah, no. So, he said, I'll get back to you in about a week. I didn't hear from him. So I picked up the phone again and I said, hey, what happened? And he was very dismissive in his response. And I knew that in their mind, nothing was going to come from it on their end. So I picked up the phone and I called my lawyer and I said, here's the situation. And she said, okay, let's get together and look at everything. And then ultimately, we both agreed, let's file a lawsuit. And that's what we did.
And taking on a multi-billion-dollar company is not a small decision to be taken lightly. How did you decide that it was worth the fight?
I guess I couldn't not fight. I couldn't not sue. I felt like, how could I accept that my creation was at retail now and what it had not been, they were profiting and I was sitting here and they were telling me to get lost. Like I just couldn't accept. And I thought, regardless of how big, like that didn't really enter my mind, how big or, all that. I had people saying, are you sure you want to do this? but all I could stay focused on was I needed to stand up for myself and stand up for what I believed was right. And that was the only solution. And so that's why I said, let's do this. And I really felt strongly it was the only way. I felt like I couldn't live the rest of my life thinking that I had been ripped off. So, so I said, yeah, let's do it. Whatever it takes. Little did I know how much it takes to, be involved in a lawsuit and file a lawsuit, but so be it.
Well, speaking of that, what did that time require of you emotionally and mentally?
So much, it's really an amazing feat to take on, and you really don't know the magnitude of it until you're in the position, because sure, you hire lawyers and everything, but there's a barrage of documents that you're reviewing every day because you are the one who was there and understand the facts. So, I really had to have an overwhelming belief in myself and what I was doing in order to take this on and continue throughout, because it was a really it was a really difficult time for me, and I had to have a huge amount of faith, faith that it's such a cliche line, but faith that justice would prevail and that the truth would come out and that I would be known for this line and that I would be rewarded for having one of my creations loved by, fans of that product. I remember looking at reviews on YouTube of the line, and there were so many people who said, "Hey, this was so so breakthrough and different than we had seen this company put out before." And, people were loving it. And I thought, it was really hard for me to know sort of behind the scenes what that was all about. So, it was really about standing up for my own integrity and hanging on to that idea, that what they did was wrong.
And ultimately, justice did prevail.
Thank goodness. So it was all worth it. Yeah, it was a year and a half. It was a profound experience to go through. So I'm proud of being able to stand up, and I'm grateful to my like amazingly bright lawyer. There was, as I said, a barrage of documents, and she took this case on, and she really, I could not have done it without her, of course. So I'm grateful. And to my husband for, supporting me the whole time, emotionally, big time.
And beyond the outcome, what did that chapter teach you about yourself and about the kind of leader that you were becoming?
In the face of overwhelming odds against me, I was able to stand up and fight and stand up for myself. I think that was probably the biggest thing that I learned about myself, that I could stay focused on the outcome, because that really was what kept me going. And I would tell myself, one day, one step, one document at a time. And yeah, just having the belief that what I was doing was right, was the right thing. And I think realizing that sometimes struggle is a part of it, and not a reason to stop doing what you're doing, because I definitely struggled through it, and there were days that I was like, is it all worth it? And I knew it was. I knew I had to do it. I had no choice. So, it was a big struggle, but I learned that that was just all a part of it.
That resilience really was shining
Yes.
through in that particular moment for sure.
Yes. Yes, yes, for sure.
We'll take one final short break. When we return, we'll talk about motherhood, legacy, and what Ellie is stepping into next. Don't miss a thing. Follow Expressions of Leadership on your favorite podcast app and connect with us on Instagram and YouTube at Expressions of Leadership. Welcome back to Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry, and today's guest is Ellie Shapiro, a woman whose life reminds us that leadership is not bound by timelines. Now, Ellie, after the lawsuit settlement, you chose to pursue motherhood through surrogacy. What did that journey demand of you?
Well, trust, trust and patience. It is a quite a big journey to go on. First, finding a woman who you connect with takes a while. You're and it goes both ways. The surrogates want to find a couple who they connect with. So, it's a two-way street and that process takes a while. So you really have to trust that you're ultimately going to find someone and be patient because there were people we thought were going to work out that for one reason or other didn't. And then, you're back on the road and just trusting that it's going to happen. So it's really a long process. And then you find your person and you meet up and you connect and everything. But then there's that period where they're going for all the tests before, you do the IVF. So you're hopeful and you're concerned and you're worried. So you found your person. Now, is this going to work out medically? Is this going to be okay? And then you are trusting when and patient when that person, has your embryo in within them, is this going to come to fruition? Are they eating right? You really have to develop a sense of trust and a sense of belief that, in the person, in yourself as well, that you've made a good decision and they're making good decisions on your behalf and that your baby will be all right. So it's a really difficult process, but for us, we stayed connected to the end game and the reason why we were doing this, which was we both really wanted to have a child. We wanted to bring a child into the world. We both wanted to be parents. So we were fortunate. The lawsuit helped with this path for us, and we found a beautiful surrogate, an amazing woman who, helped us bring our now, 5.5-year-old daughter into the world. And I'm forever grateful to the surrogate, the doctors, everybody that this happened for us.
Becoming a mother at 57 certainly defies the conventional timelines. What has that experience taught you about possibility?
Just because something is statistically rare doesn't mean it's impossible. And I think, there's doors open now and there's ways. So things are possible.
And I think as a leader, you have to also understand that things are possible,
Yes.
that just because somebody says, oh, well, there's a slim chance here, or this is unconventional, not something that people typically do, that doesn't mean that you as a leader in your own right shouldn't pursue it.
Absolutely. And that's never affected um, my decision making. If to me, if there's a slight crack in the door, I'm going through. I'm gonna take that. Until you tell me it is no longer possible, and I believe that, that's a big one. because I think sometimes you hear it's impossible. Um, until I truly believe for myself. I think that's what I would say. Until I truly believe for myself that something's impossible, then I'm going to go for it. So,
So, Ellie, when you look ahead, what are you stepping into now?
well, I've been working on a memoir for a while, and I'm committed to getting this book out and hopefully read by at least a few people. I really felt strongly that there were some things that happened along my path here, really after my parents passed away, which was an awful, awful time for me. But so much happened after their passing that ultimately was really life-changing in, incredibly beautiful, meaningful ways. And I felt like the story or my story didn't just happen because, it's a cool story and it's like some cool events that happened in my life. I felt like it happened because I really feel that I'm supposed to share, my journey with other people and really primarily I think other women.
And what message do you hope that women take away from your story?
I think it's that women can take control of the narrative of their lives. Whatever that means. We can reinvent ourselves, start over. Because I think it's never too late to learn the lessons we need to learn in order to move up to the next rung on the ladder.
And what legacy do you want to leave for your daughter and beyond?
Yeah, I think it's that I didn't give up on myself, and because I didn't, she exists.
And how can listeners learn more about you and follow the work that you're doing now?
I'm writing. I just sort of started writing articles on Substack, and my name is at Baby After 50. And I'm also sort of starting to post on TikTok, which has been very interesting. I am going to start posting a little bit more behind the scenes of my trip and what that transformation was about, and dating later and marrying later and having a kid later. So all of those things I'm starting to post about on my TikTok, which is also at Baby After 50. So I think my plan is to post some bits and pieces on TikTok and then elaborate on some of those stories on Substack.
Well, now it's time for our wisdom and whimsy segment of the show, where I ask the guest one advice question and one fun question. So, starting with the advice question, if someone listening feels like it just is too late to follow my dream, what would you say to them?
Well, my feeling is it's never too late to have a dream. I think that, if you're 62 and you have arthritis in your feet and you dream of being a ballerina, you know, like with Alvin Ailey or, the New York City Ballet, maybe you have to modify your dream or something. Maybe that's not going to happen. But you can still have the dream of being a dancer. Maybe your dream is slightly modified so that you are fulfilling whatever that dream is about for you, maybe in a little bit of a different way than you had imagined, but in a way, again, that will satisfy whatever it is that you are thinking you still want to do or want to be.
And now for the fun question. If your life had a toy packaging tagline, what would it say?
In her own way, in her own time.
That is excellent. I love that. Ellie, thank you for sharing your story of modeling a kind of leadership that's really rooted in courage and
Mm.
that boldness to reinvent, to stand your ground, and to trust yourself through every season, even when that path is unclear.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
And to our listeners, if this conversation resonated, be sure to follow and subscribe to Expressions of Leadership on Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Share this episode with someone who needs the reminder that it's never too late, and that even the hardest chapters can become something extraordinary. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry. Until next time, remember, leadership begins within, and the life that you're meant to live may be waiting on the other side of your courage. If you haven't done so already, make sure to click on that follow button so you don't miss out on future episodes. Have a guest you'd like us to interview? Questions, ideas, or just want to say hello? You can reach us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com or connect with us on Instagram or YouTube. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, thanks to our amazing team behind the scenes for making this podcast possible, including our sound engineer, Graham Palmer, and my chief encourager and advisor, Jeremiah Higgins.